This video is brought to you by Temu. Thanks to the people at Temu, they are giving new users a $100 coupon bundle. Click in the description below to claim the bundle and use them for your next purchase.
Our story begins in a high school full of delinquents and criminals, where the strongest rule and weaklings are treated like trash, much like our poor boy Roku, who later on will obviously find himself with a harem of waifus who simply can't resist his handsome good looks. But for now, Roku is constantly ridiculed, beaten, and bullied by delinquents. On top of that, he only has two friends, one he calls the Colonel, and the other the Chief. But these nerdy names and outfits only make them equal targets for constant bullying. Due to this, the boys spend most of their time hiding out in bathroom stalls, cursing out the bullies who torment them every day by ruining what was supposed to be their peaceful high school life. On one fateful day, however, Roku receives a package from his deceased grandfather, and inside of it finds a scroll of powerful magic that is said to have been passed down through his family since ancient times. And while the boys fantasize about potentially receiving superhuman powers, a bright light suddenly emerges from the scroll, and a mark is imprinted on Roku's forehead shortly after. The next day on the way to school, Roku is approached by some thugs who are somehow actually middle schoolers, but he bravely warns them to stay away from him or he might have to use his cool new powers on them, and is immediately beaten up. Surprisingly, the female thug then saves Roku by telling the others to leave him alone. At school afterwards, Roku is once again harassed by Inuma, a man who bullies him every single day, until Tsubaki, Inuma's girlfriend, surprisingly tells him to bully the Colonel and the Chief this time instead of Roku. And after another humiliating bullying session, the boys return to their usual hideout in the bathroom to complain about Inuma and his incessant bullying. But as they talk, Roku reveals that girls have been treating him differently lately, and he believes it might have to do with the powers he supposedly gained from the scroll. And at that very moment, Tsubaki knocks on their bathroom stall without giving him that she's in the boys' bathroom, and unexpectedly apologizes to Roku for always bullying him, before running away embarrassed. Even more surprisingly, when the boys return home afterwards, they notice that every delinquent girl they pass by has been staring at Roku, and they realize that the scroll has granted him the power to attract bad girls.
My nigga.
Suddenly, Inuma arrives out of nowhere and threatens to beat Roku up for trying to steal his girlfriend from him. But Roku has no idea what he's talking about. And when Inuma then reveals that Tsubaki even put him as the wallpaper on her phone, a panicked Roku decides to just run away, but accidentally collides with a blonde-haired delinquent girl, who had just finished beating up an entire gang of thugs by herself moments ago. And she places her blood-soaked hands in Roku's as she's fallen in love with him at first sight. The next day at school, Roku is shocked to find that the blonde girl has joined his class and chosen a seat right next to him. She then introduces herself as Rana, while ignoring the Colonel being bullied right behind her. But when the bully turns his attention to Roku, Rana effortlessly grabs a desk with one hand and unleashes her wrath upon him. This monstrous display of strength causes Roku to immediately run away after school. But when he then bumps into Rana moments later, he suddenly realizes how beautiful she is. And since his powers are the reason she's now madly in love with him, he tells her that it's his responsibility to protect her from the delinquents that are sure to want revenge against her. However, Rana replies that if it pleases him, she will simply slaughter all delinquents. The next day at school, Roku finds himself surrounded by a harem of bad girls. But when Rana scares them all away, Roku makes her promise that she'll be nice from now on and stop getting into fights, which she agrees to, as she's willing to do anything to make Roku happy. Later that day, however, Roku finds Rana in class all beaten and bruised, and learns that she was attacked by a group of delinquents who wanted to get revenge on her for some reason. But Rana can't remember why, even though it was the thugs she had just savagely beaten for fun the previous day. Roku feels guilty that his wish for Rana to not fight has led to her getting beat up, but she reassures him that the thugs hit weaker than gamers, and she couldn't feel a thing. And in that moment, Roku realizes that a girl as cute as Rana is ironically the epitome of manliness, and decides that he must also be a man by facing his bullies head-on. So after changing into his gym clothes, he decides to challenge Inuma to a fight, but he probably should have brought a change of underwear too, since he looks like he's about to soil himself. But despite his fears, Roku proves to be incredibly tenacious, as he refuses to back down even after eating a punch from Inuma. But this only infuriates his bully more, as he unleashes a barrage of fists onto Roku, but none of them seem to be able to knock him down. Meanwhile, his friends cry out and lament their own weakness for being unable to help, as they are forced to witness the savage beating that Roku is taking. And although Roku's knees still refuse to buckle, he remembers Rana's face and whispers for her to save him. And in that moment, Rana arrives to end the fight in a single powerful punch. After the fight, Roku refuses to go to the hospital and insists that he's okay. But as he waddles back home, he feels pathetic for being so weak that he had to beg a girl to save him, and wishes he could become manlier. Meanwhile, Enuma wakes up in the hospital and is impressed by how much courage and manliness Roku displayed. The next day after school, Roku is shocked to find Enuma waiting for him, and even more shocked when he's invited out to eat ramen together while the colonel and the chief are hiding outside to keep an eye on their boy.
Oh, okay.
Afterwards, Roku asks Enuma why he invited him out to ramen. But Enuma replies that he just felt like going out to eat with a friend, which of course shocks Roku. Enuma then also warns him that Osanada, the school's top dog and most powerful and feared delinquent, wants to fight Roku. Despite being terrified by this news, Roku realizes that running away from your problems doesn't accomplish anything, and that real men must face their destiny no matter how much it scares them. Inspired by his impressive courage and motivating words, his friends decide to join him on this impossible mission, as they will gladly go to war against Osanada with him, and even Enuma promises to have his back. The next day at school, a little girl casually walks into the classroom, searching for Roku. And although he's initially confused by this, Roku quickly learns that this little girl is actually Osanada, the top dog of Amori High School. But when Roku's powers activate, it seems to have absolutely no effect on her, as she ignores it and simply tells Roku that she's going to slaughter him. Roku then tells her that they should talk this out instead of fighting. But Osanada grows bored and punches him in the face, which surprisingly has absolutely no effect. Confused by this, she decides to test her punch on the colonel instead, and sends him flying straight into the wall. Realizing that there's something strange about Roku that makes her not want to hurt him, she agrees to talk things out with him instead, and brings him to a creepy abandoned building where he's sure he will be murdered. But instead, he's taken to Osanada's room, which happens to be all cute and pink, as if designed by a Discord-y girl. Osanada then confesses to Roku that she actually really loves cute things, and she even invites him over to hang out with her whenever he wants. But the more she looks at Roku, the more she grows confused of her feelings, as she's never felt this way before. Roku knows that this is because of his power, and realizes that he must be her first love. This causes Roku to reminisce about his own first love, which ended in heartbreak when his cute and innocent childhood friend suddenly became a delinquent after falling for a bad boy. Wanting to spare Osanada from the same heartbreak that only first loves can provide, Roku wants to find a way to undo the spell before it's too late. That's when he realizes that if his spell only works on bad girls, then by turning a bad girl into a good girl, the spell will stop working, just as it did with Tsubaki when she was initially obsessed with Roku, but went back to normal after she stopped bullying him. With this new strategy in mind, he convinces Osanada to go back to school in hopes of turning her good, by creating a fun and peaceful school life. And since Osanada had to repeat the same grade twice, she coincidentally finds herself in the same class as Roku. But while in class, she mostly just doodles, while threatening to kill anyone who tries to sneak a peek. Meanwhile, Roku begins putting his plan in motion by suggesting that the class grow plants and flowers together for their next class project. And although none of the delinquent students want to go along with his idea, when Osanada stands up and yells at them, they all mysteriously change their minds. And once they start the activity, the class representative cannot believe her eyes, as she watches all these delinquents suddenly enjoying gardening and taking meticulous notes. And surprisingly, day after day, all the delinquents, including Enuma, have a great time observing the growth of the flowers, and even compare notes together to help each other improve. On the other hand, Kurokata, Osanada's friend, tries to make her go back to her delinquent ways so they can join a powerful group known as the Onishima Gang. But she has no interest in that kind of stuff anymore, as she's only focused on finishing her report on the flowers' growth. Later that day after school, Osanada arrives to check on the flowers and finds that they've all been destroyed, which completely devastates her. This causes her to revert to her old ways, as she mercilessly beats the students responsible, unaware that this was secretly Kurokata's doing. Roku finds her moments later, but it's already too late, and since Osanada has reverted back to being a bad girl, her feelings for him return even stronger, and she confesses her love to him, which breaks Roku's heart, as he was unable to prevent her from falling in love with him after all. Osanada then tells Roku that it's too late for her to live a normal life, and heads off with Kurokata. The two then head to one of the Onishima gang's meetings, but when the gang members are understandably confused as to why a little girl is there, Kurokata lets Osanada run loose on the thugs, while he sits back and watches her unleash her monstrous strength. Meanwhile, Rana shows up to comfort Roku, who is still distraught by how a good girl like Osanada could turn bad again so suddenly. But refusing to give up on her, he begs Rana to help him save Osanada. Back at the warehouse, the Onishima gang are ready to accept Kurokata and Osanada as one of them, but Osanada has second thoughts about joining. At that very moment, Roku arrives and begins reciting his report on the flower's growth starting with day 1, while Rana effortlessly stops any and all thugs that try to silence him. But when Rana has her hands full with other thugs, Kurokata manages to sneak past her and punches Roku. But despite receiving punch after punch, Roku stands his ground and never stops reciting his report, which he continues to do, even after Osanada begs him to just run away. And at this point, even Kurokata is impressed by how Roku refuses to give up no matter how many times he's punched. The rain outside suddenly dies down as Roku slowly walks over to Osanada while still reciting his report. He ends it by saying that although the flowers were destroyed before they had a chance to fully bloom, the bigger mystery is how they were able to survive long enough to bloom at all while surrounded by so many wild delinquents. And just like the flowers, Osanada can also bloom while in a sea of delinquents, as he knows that she is a good person deep down. When the Onishima gang that arrive with reinforcements, Imuma and the boys help the others escape from the back of the warehouse. Osanada tries to invite Kurokata to come with them, but he decides to stay behind after realizing that Osanada truly is good and unfit for the kind of delinquent life he's chosen for himself. So while Roku runs away with his friends, Kurokata bravely holds back the Onishima gang alone. Sometime later, Roku gets his scooter license, and Inuma decides to give Roku his old scooter as proof of their friendship, which Roku initially refuses to accept because it's simply too flashy and delinquent looking. But when he realizes that this is Inuma's way to become better friends with him, he feels guilty and ends up unwillingly accepting it. But as he's casually driving the scooter later that day, he suddenly finds himself pursued by a female motorcycle cop, who mistakenly believes him to be a delinquent. The cop then starts violently striking Roku and his motorcycle while shouting about wanting to eradicate all delinquents until his powers activate, and she suddenly begins picturing Roku as a sort of Prince Charming, allowing him to escape her wrath, but he unfortunately dropped his wallet while doing so. The next day, however, Azami, a proper young lady from a neighboring girls' school, visits Roku to return his dropped wallet, but when she looks at his plain face, she can't help but think of him as a Prince Charming, despite still believing that he's a ruthless delinquent, which she hates with a passion. And when Inuma then arrives with Roku's revamped scooter that makes it look even more delinquent, Azami breaks down in tears and begins chastising Roku for driving such a rebellious bike, and orders him to ride her instead. To ride with her instead. She then leaves and comes back a couple moments later with her own bike, and forces Roku to ride beside her, which he agrees to because he feels bad for making a girl cry. As they're about to leave, however, they realize that the bike isn't moving forward because Rana is holding it back with a single hand. But she lets it go after Roku reassures her that he'll be alright, which he quickly regrets when Azami ends up driving like an absolute maniac, causing Roku to finally realize that she is very clearly a bad girl, who is certainly under the effects of his powers. On his walk back home afterwards, Roku unknowingly bumps into Blue, one of the 5 leaders of the Onishima gang, who asks him if he knows anything about a crazy girl that disguises herself as a cop to attack biker gang members, which Roku immediately recognizes as Azami, but swears to Blue that he's never seen her before, while deep down being filled with shock that the delinquent hating Azami would do something so reckless and violent. Despite this, Roku still decides to help her out by summoning his boys for a late-night strategy meeting. But when Inuma makes it clear how dangerous the Onishima gang is, Roku grows some balls and launches into a passionate speech about manliness, and about how he's tired of being weak and unable to do anything for his friends. And while this does inspire the colonel and the chief to man up too, Inuma is pretty much unfazed by it. The boys then head out on their scooters in hopes of catching Azami before she runs into the Onishima gang.
Oh, here we go.
Meanwhile, Azami rides through the streets of Tokyo at night with rage in her eyes, as she remembers how she once idolized the police officer that saved her, and made her want to become a cop herself, but that Blue had caused her beloved Prince Charming to crash so badly that he was unable to ride ever again. And after that fateful day, Azami vowed to eradicate all biker gangs and get revenge on Blue. When Azami then finally runs into Blue later that night, her thirst for vengeance blinds her, and he lures her into a trap, where Azami ends up face to face with an entire biker gang. Thankfully, Roku and the boys arrive moments later to protect and fight alongside her by helping her take down Blue. In response, Blue challenges them to a game of tag with a unique twist. Roku has to hold on to Blue for dear life while his teammates must catch up to him and tag him before he falls off, a feat that seems nearly impossible with how fast and recklessly Blue drives, as the closer he gets to death, the more thrilling it is to him. Despite this, Azami follows Blue closely, while the rest of Roku's friends try to slow down Blue's gang and prevent them from getting in Azami's way. But as the biker gang gets closer and closer, Inuma realizes that he has no choice but to say goodbye to his beloved baby as he leaps off his prized scooter to make the other bikers crash into it. This heroic gesture buys them a little bit of time, but when more bikers start to show up, both Inuma and the chief decide to stand their ground and fight, to buy Azami and Roku as much time as possible. Suddenly, a monster on a chopper arrives out of nowhere and plows through the bikers as if they're nothing more than ants. And although she plans to go on ahead and rescue Roku, Inuma and the chief convince her to stay back and let Roku win this with his own strength, as he doesn't want to have to rely on Rana for everything. Surprisingly, Rana obeys and kneels in the middle of the road waiting for Roku to return, as she reveals that she fully believes in him because she loves him. Meanwhile, Azami continues her daring pursuit of Blue and manages to keep up with him despite the insane speeds he's driving at. And when Blue sees the demonic look in Azami's eyes, he realizes that she's as unafraid of death as he is, and that the Reaper is chasing both of them. That's when Azami reveals that she's willing to do whatever it takes to stop him, even if it means dying, to make him pay for what he did to the police officer she idolized. Suddenly, Blue remembers having met Azami before and thinks back to how, in reality, the cop and him were actually on quite friendly terms because the cop understood the freedom and thrills that Blue chased, and even tried to be a positive role model in his life. But one day, when Blue went too fast on a bumpy road and nearly crashed into Azami, the cop saved both Blue and Azami from certain death by sacrificing his bike and his life in the process. And even though the cop thankfully survived, he was never able to ride again. Suddenly, Blue's thoughts are interrupted when he arrives at a steep turn, and decides to accelerate like a maniac. And when he can't feel Roku's weight on his bike anymore, Blue assumes that he's won the race by throwing Roku off, but soon realizes that Azami has actually managed to tag Roku after all, thus granting them the victory. Later that night, while Roku and his friends celebrate after returning back unscathed, Blue announces that he gives the leadership of his gang to Azami, as he had previously promised that anyone who beat him in a race would become the new leader. But before he leaves, Azami asks Blue to grant her one simple favor. The next day, Azami has Blue accompany her to see the police officer that they hadn't seen since the accident, who's surprisingly glad to see them both. And when he then embraces Blue from behind and asks him if he's still been getting into trouble lately, Blue breaks down into tears as he apologizes profusely for his past mistakes. Sometime later, two random girls decide to visit Roku's school because they've heard a rumor of a bad boy Chad Bear that is so handsome that girls fall in love with him at first glance. But when Roku is suddenly swarmed by a harem of bad girls who all fight over the privilege to carry his bat, followed by the crazy Azami who proclaims herself his personal driver, and his even crazier monster waifu, the two random girls immediately run away in fear.
Women want him, and men want to be him.
That following weekend, Roku invites the gang over to his house to play games and get to know each other better, but as soon as he leaves the room to get some snacks, the air immediately turns incredibly awkward, as Rana's menacing aura instantly returns every time Roku is gone. The fearless Osanada is unfazed by this, however, and casually tries to start up a conversation with Rana. And although she only replies with a single word every time, the gang learns that Rana loves meat and hates sweet things. But when Roku returns with pudding, she ecstatically expresses that pudding is her favorite food, which the rest of the gang know is just an obvious lie to make Roku happy. The next day after school, Roku and the gang are tasked with cleaning up the classroom. But while Roku and the Colonel work together, Rana is forced to work with Osanada, which greatly bums her out. Despite this, the two get along pretty well since they happen to be equally stupid, as both girls begin ripping off floor tiles with their bare hands to clean the dirt underneath. And when they notice that the ceiling is also dirty, the girls decide to copy how Roku and the Colonel work together. But Osanada proves to be a bit too small for this to work, so she decides to lift Rana up but accidentally shoves her head through the ceiling instead. But at the end of the day, Rana shows her gentle side by letting a tuckered-out Osanada sleep in her lap. Meanwhile, Roku's fame has grown among the school and gang members for his role in taking down multiple members of the Onishima gang, and Inuma warns him that the leaders of Onishima are definitely going to seek revenge. He warns in particular of Doji, the leader of Onishima, who used to be one of the lowest-ranking members in the organization. But after it was destroyed overnight, he worked hard to rebuild the gang from the ground up, and quickly became the best leader the Onishima gang has ever had. At that same time, the 4 remaining leaders of the Onishima gang arrive at Aomori High School. But surprisingly, Doji says that he doesn't care about a worthless runt like Roku, and his real aim is the monster known as Rana. The next day, the Onishima gang members transfer to Aomori High School and become new students in Roku's class, which completely shocks Roku and his friends, who are certain that Doji is out for revenge. However, in a sudden unexpected twist, Doji claims that after seeing everything Roku has accomplished, the Onishima gang felt so much admiration for him that they decided to attend the same school, so they too can enjoy a peaceful school life. Roku has a hard time believing this at first, but when Osanada shakes Doji's hand as a show of acceptance, Roku follows suit and does the same, while Doji's true objective, Rana, fills him with terror. Meanwhile, during class, the colonel can't help but find Doji incredibly creepy, while Roku is creeped out by one of the female Onishima gang members constantly staring at him, which only enrages Rana, so the boys find themselves hiding in their favorite bathroom stall once again, to try to make sense of this new crazy situation. On their way out of the bathroom, however, the boys run into Reino, who's somehow struck by Roku's powers, leading the boys to believe that Roku's power now also affects bad boys, which causes him to run away in terror, until he's trapped with nowhere to go, and Reino confesses that she's secretly a girl who dresses as a boy.
Oh, hell no!
While her twin brother, Kazuno, dresses as a girl, while secretly being a pretty violent dude. But when Roku then questions why Reino would share such a sensitive secret with him, she replies that for some reason, Roku makes her heart go doki doki before running away completely embarrassed. Meanwhile, at that same time, Doji tries to converse with Rana to find one of her weaknesses, but is unable to get through her completely stoic demeanor as Rana has her emotions completely locked up. But when Roku returns to class, Rana suddenly perks up, which makes Doji realize that Roku is the key to unlocking Rana's weaknesses. The next day, while preparing for the upcoming school festival, Roku goes out to look for some cardboard but suddenly finds himself surrounded by a harem of bad girls who are under the effects of his powers. But after talking with Otohime, the leader of the girl gang, Roku learns that not only are the girl gang actually friendly, law-abiding citizens who spend most of their time having pleasant tea parties, but that 2 years ago Rana used to be a part of their gang. And when members of the girl gang ended up being attacked by the Onishima gang, Rana single-handedly destroyed the Onishima gang while a helpless Doji could only stand by and watch. And Otohime never saw Rana again after that violence-filled night. But when Roku returns to school afterwards, Doji informs them that members of the girl gang have attacked students from Aomori High School and even beat up Reino. Roku refuses to believe this, however, as he knows that Otohime and the girls are good people, causing the entire school to turn against him and label him a traitor, just as Doji had planned. Thankfully, however, Inuma is still on his side, as he says that he doesn't trust Doji but does trust Roku, and will follow him anywhere, including the bathroom apparently, where the two try to figure out what Doji's true intentions are. Meanwhile, the colonel and the chief try to see for themselves if Roku was right about the girl gang, by stalking random delinquent girls all day, which is not creepy if done for science. And thanks to this in-depth research, they discover that the twins are the ones who have been attacking students from the school, while posing as members of the girl gang. But at that same time, Doji tries to convince Rana that if she wants to protect Roku and make sure he's no longer hated by the school, she needs to destroy the girl gang and join the Onishima gang. At first, his words only infuriate her, as she threatens to kill him if any hurt should befall Roku. But when Doji says that if she truly loves Roku that she must leave him, as she is the source of all his problems, he manages to break through Rana's emotional barrier and convince her to join him. Meanwhile, the boys finally realize that Doji's plan is to isolate Roku from Rana to recruit her, and run as fast as possible to the classroom to save Rana, but arrive too late. From outside the window, Doji yells to Roku that it's over and that he's won. But if Roku still insists on saving Rana, then Doji will gladly drag him down to the deepest pits of hell in despair. When Roku and his friends show up to school the next day, Doji announces to Roku that if he still wishes to save Rana, he will not only have to defeat all his strongest members to make it to the rooftop, but also crawl through immeasurable misery. But without skipping a beat, Roku proclaims that he will do whatever it takes to make Rana happy, which the others misunderstand as a marriage proposal. And unfortunately for Roku, reaching the roof is easier said than done, as the gang finds their paths blocked by countless students and Onishima gang members. But when Azami suddenly arrives on her motorcycle, the gang latches onto this maniac as she drives them right through the crowd and into the school.
Yeah, perfect timing as ever.
Her path is then blocked by Hondo, Onishima's most powerful member in terms of pure raw strength, which he demonstrates by effortlessly stopping her bike. Osanada then jumps in to save the day, however, and crawls all over Hondo to distract him while the others go on ahead. Meanwhile, Otohime is brought to the school rooftop, where she is forced to fight Rana as part of Doji's plan to turn Rana into Onishima's cold-blooded killing machine. At that same time, Osanada and Hondo continue trading blows as Hondo reveals that prior to meeting Doji, he was constantly bullied and ridiculed for being stupid, and the only good thing about him was his ridiculous brute force. But after meeting Doji and joining his gang, Hondo became respected by others, made friends, and was never made fun of again. Osanada says that she understands how he feels because she used to be the same. But after making new friends, she realized that being a delinquent just isn't worth it, and vows to show him that true strength comes from within. And when Hondo then grabs Osanada and throws her into the wall, she immediately sprints right back and hits him square in the face. But eventually Osanada decides to settle this with a true test of strength, as she allows Hondo to punch her in the stomach with his full strength. But when that's not even enough to break her balance, Osanada retaliates with a punch of her own, which immediately drops Hondo to the ground. And as he lays there defeated, Osanada pets his head and promises that there's more to life than strength, and more to Hondo than just a mere brute. Meanwhile, the boys are stopped by Akai, the Onishima gang's number 2 after Yashia and Doji.
Boy, if you don't...
And although Enuma plans to take him on by himself, he quickly gets his butt handed to him. And to make matters worse, the colonel and the chief also get brutally beaten, with Akai even going as far as breaking one of the chief's fingers. He then reveals to Roku that Doji gave Akai strict orders not to hurt him, otherwise Rana would be upset. So instead, Akai plans to make Roku suffer by forcing him to watch as he beats his friends mercilessly and breaks all their fingers one by one, while reminding Roku that he chose this hell himself when he ignored Doji's warnings and still insisted on saving Rana despite being a weakling. And while Roku wallows in despair, Enuma remembers how he used to have a gang of his own, which he thought were his friends, but in the end they all betrayed him to join Akai's gang. But after meeting Roku and his friends, who always had his back no matter what despite being incredibly weak, Enuma realized that real friends do exist, and that they're worth fighting for. At that same time, the chief punches Akai in the face out of nowhere, as both he and the colonel reveal that despite being cowards, they have no intentions of backing down and giving up on their friend, no matter how many fingers get broken. Suddenly, Enuma gets back up and tells the boys to go on ahead while he handles Akai. But when the boys go on ahead, Enuma quickly finds himself punched relentlessly by a furious Akai, until he finally gets the opening he was waiting for, and unleashes every remaining ounce of strength into one powerful final punch. And although Enuma manages to defeat Akai, the boys run into another problem, named Amano, who's actually Kazino and Reino's other twin brother, while Kazino appears behind them to block their exit. At that same time, Reino is tied up somewhere for having refused to go along with Doji's plans because she loved Roku too much to hurt him. And when Amano tells Roku how he beat Reino up for betraying him, Roku realizes that Reino is actually a good girl, but was forced into the gang because of Amano. In response, Roku yells at Amano for being a horrible brother for making his sister suffer like that, but he just takes it as a compliment and orders Kazino to deal with Roku, while he'll handle the colonel and the chief. Suddenly, Kazino grabs Roku and gives him a kiss on the cheek, which completely shocks everyone, including Amano. But in reality, Kazino is actually Reino, who after being freed with Kazino's help, disguised herself to help Roku, and after thanking him for always supporting her, she stays behind with the colonel and the chief to fight Amano, while Roku goes on ahead. On his way to the rooftop, however, Roku suddenly comes across a hallway full of defeated students, and is immediately pulled into a dark room by Yashia, the Onishima gang's strongest member after Doji, who reveals that she absolutely loves strong men like Roku, because she loves watching them break. And without wasting time, Yashia immediately begins whipping Roku in hopes of breaking him, then nurses him back to health because she can't control her love for him, then whips him all over again. But when Roku begins blindly swinging his arms like an idiot, he notices that Yashia suddenly backs away from him, and realizes that because Yashia only loves strong men, his powers must be making her perceive him as stronger than he really is. Using this to his advantage, Roku tries to intimidate Yashia into giving up. Suddenly, Yashia accidentally trips and nearly falls out the window, but is saved at the last second by Roku. Believing that Roku is so incredibly powerful that he decided to save his enemy, Yashia's love for Roku grows more and more, causing him to appear stronger and stronger until her love for him completely overwhelms her and she passes out. And with Yashia defeated, Roku finally makes his way to the rooftop and arrives just in time to stop Rana from dealing the finishing blow to Otohime. However, when Roku asks Rana to stop fighting, she kneels before him and refuses as she realizes that Roku is too good of a person, while she is a violent killing machine that is rotten to the core and that she is only happy when she is fighting. Because of this, Rana tells Roku that this is where they must part ways, as she is beyond saving. But as tears surprisingly fall down her face, Roku understands that because of his powers, the more bad Rana becomes, the stronger her love will grow for him, which will only cause her more pain in the long run. But deep down, he knows that Rana has some good in her, and he's desperate to help her see it. Rana disagrees, however, as she doesn't care for anything or anyone other than Roku, and hanging out with Roku's friends does not change that. She then gets up and leaves with Doji. Determined to get Rana back at all costs, Roku stops Doji and demands that he fight him, and that if Roku wins, Rana stays with him. Doji agrees, after getting approval from Rana of course, and effortlessly avoids all of Roku's attacks, while throwing out powerful hits of his own. But just as all seemed lost, Roku's friends arrive in time to save him. When Roku then tells them to stand back and let him fight with his own strength, they tell him that they are his strength, just as he was their strength throughout their various fights, as he is their motivation to never give up. And with this, the gang joins in on the duel and begin trading blows with Doji, who proves to be far stronger than any of them had expected, as he easily takes them all on. But no matter how many times they get knocked down, they always get back up and keep fighting, which confuses and frightens Doji, as he doesn't understand where this courage and determination is coming from. He suddenly thinks back to his own past, where he was constantly bullied, so he decided to surround himself with powerful people by joining the Onishima gang, to make sure he would never be bullied or hurt again. But after the gang was wiped out by Rana's immense strength, he fell in love with her at first sight, as he knew that so long as she was by his side, he would never be hurt again. But as he watches Roku manage to rally the troops over and over again, no matter how many times they get knocked down, he begins to realize that Roku's true power is not only his immeasurable courage, but his ability to inspire courage in others. And as Doji grows frightened of Roku's true strength, Rana suddenly places herself between him and the others, tells Roku that she truly is rotten to the core, and that she does not care for anyone but him. She even admits that she doesn't remember the names of any of Roku's friends. But even though she disagrees that there is any good in her, she feels that by being with him she can become good, and promises to stay with him forever. Several days after the fight, Reino and Kazino started attending school as their real selves, and Doji started to rebuild the Onishima gang once again. But the day after the fight, the school festival went on as normal, with Roku and his class putting on a play. Unfortunately, Rana forgot all her lines, but surprisingly reveals that she remembers all her new friends, as she names them each one by one, and thanks them all for their help. Thanks so much for watching this anime recap, and a true sincere thank you to those who always support this channel and watch my videos. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you all again in the next one.